Gamshi Lakwan, which if you don't speak Kalapuya means what's up in Kalapuya. Welcome to DiversiTV, the live weekly interview show, a broadcast from LCC main campus. I'm Mark Harris, your host, and I'll be introducing our very special guest today. If you're new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you are part of our growing legion of fans, welcome back. DiversiTV, our mission, and we choose to accept it, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, we have been looking at systems this season, and our seasons roughly correspond to LCC terms. This is season 10. We've been doing this for nearly 4 years. Looking at the system as we are today of Lane Community College, go back to slide if you would, gents. Thanks. We've been looking at systems. So if you're the flagship of a system, then you're expected to be the best in the fleet, like the latest version of the Starship Enterprise for the Federation, for you trekkers. Arguably, the flagship school in the Oregon Community College system is Lane Community College. LCC is an $80 million plus concern, and the only community college I've observed with a health clinic and a full-time addictions counselor, yours truly, which produces an interesting version of diversity in terms of when we're looking at mental health, addiction issues, vets returning, and so we offer a number of services that are unique here and befits our position in the League of Innovation, which actually should be our guest's focus to talk about that, but I can blow our horn a little. So we're the only community college, I believe, building a Native American longhouse. Dr. Mary Spilde is the 6th president, 3rd longest presiding after Eldon Schaefer and Jerry Moskus, and the first woman president of Lane Community College. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Mark.
So where are you from? That's a standard question we ask.
I was born and raised in Scotland, near Edinburgh in a small town.
Which small town?
It was called Kincardine. It was a coal mining town, hydroelectric power town, very much a working class town.
Okay. How did you come to Eugene?
Well, my husband is from Oregon. We met in Spain. And just to bring another country into the equation here, and spent our first year of married life in Central America, in El Salvador, with his job.
Okay. All right. Oh, what are your bloodlines, and are you trilingual?
Well, I wouldn't call myself trilingual. I am a Scot, and my grandfather was Irish, so very much the Celtic race, I would say. In terms of languages, when you come from a small country like Britain, you have to learn other languages as part of Europe. So in high school I had 5 years of Latin, 5 years of French, 4 years of German, and some Spanish. And then through living in Spain and living in Central America, I got pretty decent at speaking Spanish, but that was 30 years ago. And although I've tried to keep up with that and have gone to Spanish immersion, I certainly wouldn't call myself fluent in Spanish anymore, and need to keep working on that.
Even so, that does give you a perspective, shall we say, beyond the typical American.
Well, I think more and more people in the United States are realizing that we need to speak other languages, and we need to learn about other cultures. Everything's hitched together.
Yeah.
And if we didn't know that before, surely the latest round with the economy, where pieces started to drop out and everybody was affected, has to let us know that we are a global community, and we have to act, I believe, in the United States as if we're part of that community. And part of that is learning about other countries, learning other languages, being able to meet people where they are. As well as, of course, the United States is made up of immigrants.
Yes.
And, we came here and took a lot of things from the First Peoples, and we need to embrace that and embrace the people that have come in the past and the people that will come in the future.
What generation college student are you?
I'm a first-generation college student. My dad was a coal miner's son. Left school when he was 14, apprenticed as a baker, and owned his first business when he was maybe 21 or 22 after he'd finished his apprenticeship. And still had his hands in the dough when he died at age 92. 92. And my mother left school when she was 15. She was raised on a farm. Her dad was a barber. And she worked alongside my dad and is still going strong at age 93. Good genes.
Good genes, I'll say.
But, you know, they had, I don't know where, I think it's really quite remarkable when I think about it now, because they had a value for education. And from a very young age, I'd say maybe 4 or 5, I knew that I was going to go to university. And that's even more remarkable because at that time in Scotland, maybe 3 or 4% of the people went to university. So for my parents to have this dream for their children is really quite remarkable. And it, for me, you know, it has opened so many doors. And so I'm very, very grateful for their vision of seeing their kids get an education and then supporting me when I was in college and supporting me ever since.
What are your degrees in?
My undergraduate bachelor's degree in science is in business and social administration. And then I have a law degree from the University of Edinburgh. Both of those degrees are from the University of Edinburgh. And then once I discovered community colleges and realized that my life's work was going to be in education, I thought, okay, I better go back and get the credentials necessary. So I have a Master's of Education and a PhD from Oregon State University.
That kind of presages the next question because you know, how did you come to this particular path? Because, you know, when you talk about your education and your interests, and you're a first-generation college student, because we talk about that a lot here at Lane. And if you're going to mentor the student that's going to have your job in 30 years, what would you tell that person?
Well, get your credentials. You need to, I mean, to become a college president these days, it's very unusual, particularly if you're a woman or a person of color, to get the job without having a PhD. So credentials are important. Experience, the most likely route to a college presidency is through a vice president of academic or student affairs. Teaching experience really helps, and my first job at a community college was teaching. And then a whole variety of administrative experiences. So I think it's just doing the work, getting the credentials, getting the experience. But I think the most important thing I would tell anyone who wanted to be the president of a college is you have to fall in love with community colleges and our students and our mission, because you need to be passionate about what you do, because there's so many things pulling at you when you're a president of a college, the community, legislators, faculty, students. Excuse me, you need to really love what you do. You need to love the mission and why you're here, and remember that every single day. So whether it's president of a community college, a faculty member, or whatever endeavor people pursue in their professional lives, I think you have to love it. And when I first discovered community colleges, it was a few years after I came to this country. So I was a female Scottish lawyer in small town Oregon. Wasn't working for me, couldn't find work. Got a job at Kmart as a checker, and it was a humbling experience. But the thing it taught me, one was how to work in this country, and the second was I discovered community colleges because many of the people I worked with were going to the local community college so that they could make a better life for themselves and their families. So I began to, well, what are these community colleges? Because we didn't have them in Scotland. And so I took some classes at the local community college, and, you know, by some great fluke, got a job teaching in a displaced homemaker program, teaching adult basic ed GED, and I just fell in love with what community colleges do, the fact that we take the most underrepresented, most underprepared, first generation, disadvantaged students and give them a chance, give them access to higher education. It was just amazing to me, and as soon as I got there I knew that this is where I would spend my professional life.
That explains a lot. I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, I mean, because I am part of the press, I mean, I was on your original hiring committee. This is not something you talk about.
No.
In your it's not on your resume.
No.
And, but a lot of what we're doing and where you're coming from makes sense for this mission. Right. Who's going to hire a Scottish lawyer? Oh, well,
right.
Okay, well, you're not American and you're over-prepared, I mean, that was the same thing that happened with me getting hired here, was, he's overqualified for the job and he's taking a cut in pay. Why would he come work here? Well, besides having kiddos to raise, there's things you can do here that you can't do anywhere else, because the people that are coming here are coming with the cards stacked against them so much that it's part of our mission to really, it's almost like an impossible mission, really, to get them through this. And so, the displaced homemaker piece, I mean, that's one of the many populations that we've traditionally done that four-year schools don't do.
That's right. And, I think part of our job is to make sure that students understand that they have a right to higher education. It's not just for the privileged few, it's for them as well, and to create the kind of environment where we're inviting them in to experience that from a young age, not just when they're 18 and they've graduated from high school, but if they're a dropout from high school, or if they're a middle schooler and they don't know that they have the right to access a higher education. And especially now when so many jobs, they may not require a bachelor's degree, but they require some post-secondary education. Those jobs that used to exist in the mills where you could have a high school education or less and go and make a good life for your family, those jobs aren't there anymore, and you need some post-secondary education. So I think it's incumbent on us who work in community colleges to let people know that they have a right to be here and to welcome them in, and then figure out what support systems do they need to be successful.
Given what's going on in the economy, I'm kind of jumping ahead because it just seems to go with the flow. You're president of the National Community College Association.
I am,
right?
For another month.
And our new president, relatively new president, has kind of made that a focus. Can you talk about that initiative? And what is it like to meet him, if you have?
Well, I had the opportunity last July, just as I took over as the chair of the American Association of Community Colleges, to go and hear President Obama make his announcement about community colleges and the American Graduation Initiative. It was in Michigan. It was in the heart of the auto industry, huge unemployment. Yeah. And he shone a light on community colleges, and really he sees us as part of the economic recovery, part of the solution to our economic troubles by preparing and educating people to go out into the workforce, and through things like our Small Business Development Center, also helping to create the businesses that will hire people in our local communities. And community colleges, when you think about four-year schools, we've often been seen as somehow maybe second class or not quite as good as. And those of us who work in community colleges know that our quality is high, that students who transfer to the university do as well or better than students who start at the university. People who go into be nurses or paramedics or respiratory therapists or welders or auto mechanics do very, very well. So we know this, but somehow there's a little bit of a class system going on.
There is.
And one of the things that President Obama has done, I think, is raise us up and say, you are part of higher education. You're a very important part, maybe the most important part, and we need to shine a light on that. But he's also challenged us. He's also said we need to do better. We need to not just let students come in and do whatever they want. We need a little more focus. We need to move from the idea of come in and do whatever you want, freedom to fail, to right to success. And what are the things that we need to do to make sure that students, particularly underrepresented students, complete something, whether it's a degree, a certificate, a credential that has value in the marketplace, or just a set of classes that will help them upgrade their skills to be successful on the job. Whatever that definition of completion is, we need to help students set a pathway and then create steps along the way so that they can really complete their goals. And that, I think, is the challenge that President Obama has given to us.
You and I have participated in conversations, which, when I talk about them to other people, and I know you don't think this, so in the interest of disclosure, right? I usually say, people think I'm crazy for, attempting, for example, to create a treatment program in the middle of community college, right? Because, well, that's what we're getting. We have been getting that for some time, even before I got that. So we need to move from the illusion that we're like, what is the phrase in English? A red-haired stepchild, a poor person's four-year school. And no, we're something better than that, because really the door is open for other folks. And part of what our mission is, because I'm a second-generation college student, but my father in particular was a graduate of an HBCU, and a historically black college and university. The mission was educating sharecroppers' kids to participate in research, et cetera, with awareness of barriers, and teaching them to go past the barriers, but that was solidly part of their education. And that's kind of what we're doing here, and what mirrors part of your experience. Yes, you're a lawyer, but you're working at Kmart with people who want part of that educational dream, and so you've already gone past the barriers, but you're also solidly aware of them too. In a sense, you're a pioneer. So within that motif, you came here, and there were those who had been here before you. So in your mind, how are you making your mark, say, improving the stew, planting the garden, or choose your own metaphor?
Well, it's been a tough 9 years as president. I started the job a month before 9/11, and then we'd had our very best year ever at the legislature. And so, although we had some financial challenges, it was looking very, very doable. And then, as we all know, the economy fell out, and we had to make reductions and close programs and lay off staff. And it was a very fast learning experience and tough year. But I think that, and it hasn't really gotten any better in terms of investment in community colleges over the last 9 years. In fact, if anything, it's worse, especially in the last couple of years. But I think even with all of that, I think that the people at Lane really came together and worked together to try and figure out what we could do together to make it work for students. And so lots of people have made lots of sacrifices to get us to where we are today. And I think, although it's not as it should be in terms of our funding, I think we're in a much better financial position than we were in 2001, 2002. And some of those very tough decisions that we made collectively are paying off now, because we can at least cover what we need to be doing without layoffs. We can keep people working. We can keep people serving students. And so that feels like it's at least a step in the right direction. Now, if I'd had this interview a couple of days ago, I would have felt even better about that. But of course, as we know, yesterday, revenue forecast $563 million, 9% cut across the board, which for Lane is $2.6 million reduction next year, at a time when our enrollment this year is probably going to be up 15 to 20%. It was up 15.7% last year. So at the time that our enrollment is going up, our budget is going down, and students are having to pick up the vast piece of that through increased tuition. And of course, our faculty and staff are bearing some of the burden by, not getting increases or having furlough days or doing the kinds of things that they've had to do. So again, I say that we've tried to work together. Students bear some of the cost, our faculty and staff bear some of the cost, but we try to stay focused on the mission. So I would say that my first point about what mark am I making? It's been a tough 9 years, but think a lot of really good things have happened. The innovation that exists on this campus is really amazing. It's almost like it's in the water, and faculty and staff really embrace thinking differently about their work and figuring out what they need to do to serve students. As you mentioned, we're a member of the League for Innovation in the Community College. It's a national organization focused on practice, innovative practice in community colleges. And we're one of 19 colleges in the country that serve on that board, purported to be the 19 best community colleges in the country regarding innovation. So we're in the company of the largest post-secondary institution in the country, Miami-Dade in Miami, Florida, San Diego Community College District, Maricopa Community College District in Phoenix, Arizona, Seattle Community College District. So we're actually one of the smaller colleges. But when people think about innovation and they think about community college practice, Lane is definitely one of the colleges that rises to the top, and people look at us to see what we're doing. When, in my role as chair of AACC, I have been in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country a lot, and people keep telling me how much they look at our website and take ideas from our website, and that's great. I mean, people should be sharing and not reinventing the wheel. But it makes me feel good about what our faculty and staff do here at Lane on a daily basis without a lot of resources. I mean, some of those other colleges, they've been able to throw a lot of money at innovation, and we haven't been able to do that at Lane, and yet we're seen as one of the best community colleges in the country. And I feel very good about that. I don't own it. I feel very much a part of it, and working together, we've made that happen. The other thing I would say is that you mentioned planting a garden, and one of the things that I learned quickly at Lane is that any pronouncement from the president is pretty much dead on arrival. So there's not even any point in doing that. But you know, one of the jobs that I have is to be out in the world, to figure out what the trends are, to see what's going on nationally, to learn from that, and to bring it back, and to take good ideas from other places and see how they might work at Lane Community College. And so it's very much a matter of planting seeds, you know, putting ideas out into the world, and seeing what happens, and hoping that some of them blossom. And one of those ideas was the Peace Center. I think I made an announcement at an in-service. I was talking about the future, and I said something like, if I have my way, we'll have a Peace Center at Lane. And that really resonated with people. It wasn't my idea. It was, the idea existed in the organization. I gave voice to it, and then everybody coalesced around it. So everybody, not everybody, but many people feel like they own the Peace Center. It's not, it doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to all of us. And so that idea of planting seeds, so a seed was planted, and you know, it blossomed, and now we have a Peace Center, and Stan Taylor is doing great work on developing a degree program in peace and conflict studies, and it will be articulated with universities, and we have the Peace Symposium, and those steps, those small steps, are really going to come to something that is really important. I think the issue of sustainability, and thinking about sustainability as the triple bottom line. So it's not just about the environment, it's about the economy, it's about social justice. I feel very good about the work Lane has done with that. I can't take credit for that. That was really the passion of faculty and staff who started to do work, and we started to get awards. And then I started to be asked to go and speak about sustainability at Lane Community College, and it was like, oh my goodness, now I need to find out what we're doing. And through that education process that I went through, became passionate about sustainability myself, and really want to do everything I can to support the many, many efforts that go on across the campus around social justice and the economy and environmental sustainability. And then the last couple of things I would mention that I've had a hand in are certainly the facilities work. You know, passing the bond was very much a collective effort. But we did it, and that was very encouraging, and we're going to see some beautiful facilities around campus as a result of that. And then the last thing I would say is bringing the idea of fiscal sustainability, our own fiscal sustainability, into the discussions. So as a faculty member, yes, it's your job to counsel and to teach, but you need to be aware of what it takes for this organization to be fiscally sustainable. That's not just my job, it's not just administration's job, it's not just the board's job. We all have to be conscious of what it takes to run this organization and what resources that we need. And I'll go out and try and get as many resources as we can, whether it's through fundraising or legislative work, but we all have a role in that and understanding how our practice in the classroom or on the job impacts the fiscal sustainability of the college and impacts what we're able to do for the community.
One of the things that sitting on faculty council, diversity council, kind of putting that challenge out to my colleagues, and it's like importing the HBCU model. Like, okay, no, I'm not just paid to counsel students and generate content. I'm also paid not only to be, to save money, but also help make money, because that's the HBCU model.
Yeah.
You're engaged in the community and you're, generating FTE, and I'm doing that, by having, relatively popular classes. This show is actually an attempt to generate FTE at some point, but that idea is slow to catch on. People don't necessarily think that is their role to do that, or they're stressed either way. But okay, both. But understanding that, look, you have a role to play in that as well. So in terms of looking at the diversity mission of the college, because when we talk about a social justice focus within sustainability, then and our diversity focus also has a social justice focus. What do you think the college's mission should basically play out in that area?
Well, I think there isn't a better vehicle than a community college to focus on social justice, bringing people who might not see themselves as being part of higher education into higher education and making sure that they get what they need to be successful. So I think that social justice is our mission. It's what we do. I think that in terms of who we serve, we at community colleges, and I think that this is true of Lane as well, get the most underprepared, underrepresented, and first generation and people that don't have much money. And so I think there's an even higher level of responsibility to make sure that we're doing everything we can for those populations. And there are gaps, there are achievement gaps, and I think this is part of President Obama's message. We've got to redouble our efforts to make sure that we're closing those gaps. And so that takes thinking about not just students in the aggregate. I mean, if you look at our data, you might think, well, the graduation rates or the completion rates are okay. They're not, they may not be that great, not that bad. They're okay. But when you start to disaggregate the data and look at maybe a first-generation student or a student of color, there are gaps. So we need to be thinking about the different populations we serve and then deciding what are the strategies, what are the best strategies for that student of color or that first-generation student. So I don't think we do well by treating students as if they're all the same. They're not. So, and it's not favoring one group over another. It's just saying, what does this group of students need and how can we respond to that? And I think that our Title III grant, which is all around student success and student engagement, is really taking that on and really thinking about the very many different populations we serve and how can we have the right response to make sure that that student is getting the very, very best experience they possibly can, whether it's a first-year experience or a transiciones or a service learning project, learning communities, multiple ways of teaching and learning that we know work really, really well. How do we integrate those into our normal practice and make sure that we're closing that achievement gap and getting students to the place that they need to be?
I think one of the things, just to highlight what you're talking about from a policy point of view, so with transiciones, if you know that there's a gap from disaggregating the data, and you can target particular populations that are falling into that gap, well, you can have programs that teach them to bridge that gap, and
Absolutely.
that means having people in place to do that, and also sustaining them in that effort. So having targeted programming that works, and we have a number of those things: Transiciones, Rites of Passage, and a few other programs like that. You're the ultimate hiring authority.
I am.
And so part of, you sign the paper that hire folks, but at a certain level, there are people, this is one of those unscripted questions, but somebody asked, this is one of the things that I get asked all the time. How do you get on at Lane? Or it seems like it's tough to get on at Lane. And then there's the retention question, and when part of the whole diversity rubric comes down to, okay, what are you doing to increase the numbers of the food groups, et cetera, in a community that it's often tough to be in. I mean, that's what our Rites of Passage kids, for example, are saying. It's hard being in this place, let alone making it through the school system and then going to Lane. And even though they feel that at least the Rites of Passage kids in the African American program are saying, yeah, this is an oasis for us that we don't find anywhere else in the community, and it does make home more of an oasis. But the fact that you have this program here is a saving grace for us. But then there's the hiring piece,
right.
And then there's contracting with minority firms, building, et cetera. In terms of talking about that kind of thing and changing those policies, what would you say?
Well, the thing I would say about diversity is that it is a journey. It's not something that you ever complete. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm proud of the work that Lane has done around programming and around our Longhouse, and some limited success in hiring. But there's just so much more to be done. Yeah. And so I think, on the curriculum side, one thing I'm always looking for is, are things on the margins or are they mainstreamed? And so we've got to do a lot more mainstream, moving things into the mainstream. Yeah. And I think some of that has happened, but it probably isn't at the scale that we need. We know that we don't have a lot of money to spend for a lot of additional things. So that causes me to think, okay, if we don't have a lot of money to spend, we need to think about how we're spending the money we have. And that's when it comes to integration of curricular practices, right, or programs into kind of the mainstream curriculum. And we're doing that in sustainability right now, thinking about what are the sustainability pieces that belong in a class, whether it's a political science class, a history class, a science class. We've done that to a certain extent with diversity. We probably need to do more of that, thinking about how do we integrate it so that every student we turn out has a sensibility about privilege, power, difference, what it means to be an African American person in the world, a white person in the world, a Latino, Latina person in the world. We need to be building that into everything we do across the curriculum. So I think that's one thing that we have done some work on it. There's much more to do. On the employment side, similarly, we've had a focus on making sure that we've got diverse pools. There are challenges with that. I mean, Oregon's history, the communities of color are small communities, changing certainly, particularly with the Latino population. Yeah. The demographics show that there's going to be huge growth, which calls us to really develop our cultural competency to be able to welcome those populations into the college and help them be a real and true part of the community. But students are going to expect to see people that either look like them or have shared their experience in some way, if it's a first-generation student or right. a person from that comes to us from poverty. So we need to continue to really work on that despite the challenges. And then once we get people here, we need to work on how we keep them. And part of that is Lane's work to do. How do we make this a welcoming environment so that people feel that they're doing meaningful work and they're well supported in their work, and that we don't overtax them because you are the African American person that's asked to be on every hiring committee or go to every meeting.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you know,
Right.
so how do we share the work so it's not just a small group of people who are doing all the work? So we have to work on that. And then we have to work in the broader community. I mean, it might be as simple as, if I'm an African American woman, where do I go to get my hair done?
Mm-hmm.
Those community supports that you want, that you might have up in Portland or in LA,
Yeah.
but don't exist in Eugene.
Right.
How do we address that? We can only address it as a community. Lane can't do that by itself. And then also making sure that when we bring diverse populations into the college as staff, that we're connecting them up. Not just with the communities of color, but across the community, so that they feel that there's a support system in place. Yeah. The last thing I would say about employment, there's a lot of competition. I mean, every college in the nation is thinking about how they can make themselves more diverse so that they can better serve their student population. And so that in itself is challenging. We have to figure out what is it that we can offer people, you know, scholars of color, sexual orientation, difference. How can we entice them to come to Lane and have them realize that this is a good place for them to be, and that while they can offer us much, hopefully we can offer something in return that makes it worthwhile for them to be here.
I think one of the things that we offer, certainly having been here now for 18 years, which still is a trip to even think about that, which now makes me the senior African American staff person, which is even weirder to think about, but okay. I'm able to do things here that I might not be able to elsewhere, even in a larger population center, but certainly I have been able to do those kind of things. And so looking back at some of the history of some of the folks that have been here and have moved on elsewhere, they've been doing that too. So part of, I think, that answer is being able, if you're going to come here, you're going to have your own resiliency, right? You know, my solution to the hair thing is, okay, since there's only 5 places in the entire state that I could actually have my hair done, and when I had an afro, and nearly none that I could have dreadlocks done, you know, okay, well, I need to frequently travel, you know, and, you know, get a larger perspective outside of, you know, small town Eugene. But while I'm here, you know, be able to innovate and find those innovations accepted among a broader community base than you would stereotypically expect. So one of the things that we look at, the special challenges, let's see, if we look at diversity efforts being categorically focused, so improving the plight experience in particular of particular diversity food groups, and we're doing some of those minimum baseline things. What directions do you think we could move in?
Well, I think one of the things that the executive team just did was to do a study circle on racism. Okay. So, you know, part of it is our own learning, and not assuming that we know everything that needs to be done, or we know everything about Oregon's history or Lane County's history. So I think we're an educational institution, so we should be continually learning about our environment and our history and the traditions that exist, and hearing other people's stories about their experience. And that's what a study circle on racism does. And it was, I think it was, you know, just a perfect educational experience. So the question is, how do you get that to scale in an organization that has 1,000, 1,500 employees? I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think you build coalitions around it, you know, you start to have the conversations, you plant seeds, you invite people in to have the conversations, and you know, and before you know it, something's blossomed and it's taken off and it's got a life of its own. And but I think, you know, just taking the time to educate yourself first, and then trying to figure out from an institutional perspective, how can we move that forward and invite people to participate, that would be one thing. And because we've gone through the experience ourselves, we can talk about it, and we can tell our story about what that felt like to be in a study circle. And you can have study circles on lots of things, not just racism. Right. So we can that's certainly something that we could think about doing. We've got a very comprehensive diversity plan, as you know. It's got multiple items. I think one thing that we need to do is have a little focus, because it just seems so overwhelming that there's so much to do on so many fronts. And I think what happens when there's so much to do on so many fronts is that we get so diffused that we never feel we make any progress. We make little bits of progress on multiple things, or maybe a few steps back on multiple things, but you don't see the real movement forward. And so I think one of the things that I've asked Donna Keiki, our Chief Diversity Officer, to work with the Diversity Council on is, all of these things we need to do that are in the plan, but what are the 4 or 5 things that we could tackle and really focus on and try and make some progress, some tangible progress, so that we could say, in the 2010-2011 school year, we set this as a goal, and here's the measurement. We've made this amount of progress. No, we're not there yet, but you can see that we've made progress. So I think bringing some focus to all of the challenges that we face around diversity and all of the things that we have in our plan, and really all of us working to make those things a reality, or at least get them moving in the right direction, I think that would help the college a lot. So that's more of a process answer than a specific answer, but I think process is a part of this, really having some focus and then putting the energy behind moving those 4 or 5 things so that we see some results.
Part of, looking at my job description, since there wasn't really cultural competency built into the 92 version of my job description, but it was part of my industry, so I had to bring that, and that was part of the reason for my hire, at least according to those that are still here that were on that original hiring committee. Before we started recording, we were talking about a particular incident that happened that kind of highlights, the training piece and the conversation piece. So, a student with a hidden disability, basically a mental illness, so, without necessarily revealing what I deal with in my field is dual diagnosis. So people who have a mental illness and an addiction. And so he's in recovery from both. And read an article in the Torch that described, was kind of deprecating to people with mental illness.
Right.
And he felt really insulted and, felt that aspersions were cast that were really equivalent to being, called a racial word or whatever, and it was that intense for him.
Right.
And he felt that this was a hostile environment. He was on the verge of quitting, right? And so, staff had it together enough to have a conversation, facilitate a conversation with an outside facilitator, and work it through the issues. And so, this afternoon he was talking about, well, you're going to be talking with the president. Why don't we have a conversation on ableism? We have all these other isms. Why not ableism? And I was saying, well, right. Where would you have that conversation with students? We can barely have a mandatory diversity training for staff. That was one of the things that's in the diversity plan, right? And people have, some employee groups have been fighting that tooth and nail. There are sections of it. Whether we will cast a spirit, you can't say, but I will say, my bargaining unit, even though they have a no tolerance policy, it's like, okay, no, what is the minimum training that you need to enforce on your members? Because you can't have people saying, slavery improved black people and say that that's academic freedom. I'm sorry. That's not our view. But the equivalent thing for disabled folks, because being called bipolar and have that equivalent to, you know, going postal when if you're, I'm a mental health professional, so most bipolar people have trouble either on one end getting up out of bed to even come to school, let alone trying to do too much on the other end, right? So where do we have that conversation that raises the bar for what we know as common knowledge?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I don't know if I have an answer. I have some ideas. I mean, I think that the Diversity Council, one of our governance councils, should be a place where these kinds of issues can be raised and then discussed about how we roll out conversations like that. I think if we back to the idea of having some focus in our diversity work, I think with our Chief Diversity Officer should be, you know, taking those focused areas that Diversity Council has signed off on and then figuring out, doing the implementation, you know, working with people to implement. And so that would be another place, if it was on that list, that we could, you know, put some energy behind moving that forward. With the incident that you mentioned, the incident in the torch, the one thing I appreciate is that someone stood up and said, you know, this is a problem for me, because that immediately heightened everybody's awareness, including the writer of the article, who had no idea. I think it was an April Fool's thing, and you know, saw it as funny. Now, that student and the paper, I think, without as soon as they knew it was a problem, I think reacted in a very positive way. I mean, they apologized, they realized that a mistake had been made, and I think through conversations they're very, very aware. They'll never forget that lesson. And that's the piece about being an educational institution, that when students come, they do not have all of the education and skills that they need. That's why they're here. So part of our job is to make sure that when they leave and when they're here, that they're developing competence, and one of the competencies is cultural competence. And so we are an educational institution, and students and staff are going to make mistakes. And I think the important thing is that when that happens is we hold it up and say, this happened and it shouldn't have happened. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to educate ourselves, educate each other to know what it felt like for that student? And the impact of that article on that particular student, and kind of knowing that experience and internalizing it a bit and saying, okay, what do we need to do as educators to make sure that that doesn't happen again? I think is you know, one of the blessings and joys and one of the challenges of being an educational institution.
Yeah. I mean, just to follow up on that, because he was a guest on the show. And we talked about that before that, and I'm actually working with him. So, you know, I had a copy of DSM. I said, okay, here's what bipolar means. He goes, really? That's what that, wow. And I said, okay, look, you're 20. Not to be ageist, but you're 20.
Right.
So when you start out with lunatic, and then, you know, woman, I mean, I've seen that. So he thought, because, you know, it's his first student paper experience, he's just reporting the news. And so he actually saw that. I mean, I've seen that person on the bus. And, you know, Dean's seen those people. You know, nobody sees Dean. But, you know, my engineer, I've seen those people on the bus, right? So he's just reporting what he's seeing. And this woman is talking to her doll and then beating up on her, and he called that bipolar. Well, no. Wrong. That's not what that means, right? And so notice how, okay, so my article was saying, look, 30 years ago you couldn't have even ridden on the bus as a black person.
Exactly.
All right? Now you can ride the bus wherever you want, and the people that used to be in institutions are now riding the bus with you, right? So what is the story behind the story? Because now you're finding your voice as a young black gay writer. Your role, if you're following the role models of other black gay writers, is to illumine the injustice. Right? To see the story behind the story and say, okay, we need to increase our caring community. And he's been working on that.
That's right.
And one of the things that within, like, I showed him gender identity dysphoria. And so he turns to it and he goes, wait, this is right after pedophilia. So wait a minute. I immediately don't like this, this point of view. And this is what the normal psychologists are saying. Well, I said, do you notice that it doesn't define what a healthy, young, black, gay person should be like? Notice it doesn't say that.
Yeah.
So when you write this about, you know, that this is non-scientific or it's just opinion, the American Psychological Association is not going to agree with you. So you might want to rethink that, because we then have to have that conversation about, yeah, the skinheads that might attack you are not considered mentally ill, right? And that's another diversity conversation.
Right.
How do we come to, when does it come to be normal to accept difference and to be able to utilize that diversity? That's part of, you know, our conversation as educators.
Yeah.
At a recent forum, when you talk about, let's see, actually we talked about that, and Obama, wow. Let's talk about the future. So we've had open houses. We're going to be building a building downtown in the Pit. And there's a model downstairs in this building of Lane Community College of 30 to 50 years in the future. What, if demographic trends continue, what do you think that Lane would look like, and how can we prepare for that now?
Well, I think one of the realizations that the board and I have come to is there's never going to be enough public money to do what we need to do. It's just not in the cards. It's not that we won't work for it, fight for it, but it just doesn't look like we're ever going to have enough to fulfill our mission for this community. So I think what the board and the administration has been thinking about is, okay, if there's not enough public money, what kind of financial strategy do we put together that will bring in money to allow us to fulfill our mission? So that calls us to be much more entrepreneurial. It calls us to look at our assets, and you know, that's across the board. Our curricular assets, the assets of our faculty and staff bring, fundraising, our ability to do that, and our land assets, just to name a few. And how can we use those assets in a way that will bring revenue to the college, not for the sake of bringing in revenue, but revenue that we can plow back into doing what it is that we do for students in our community. And in improving the revenue situation of the college, also improve the lives of our students and of ourselves. So that's kind of one of the overarching things that we are looking at. It's back to the idea of fiscal sustainability, but it is trying to be more entrepreneurial and using our assets. So the perimeter planning that you're alluding to that we're having open houses about is to look at the land that we own and to think about how do we develop that land in a sustainable way that will be good for the community and good for us at the very same time. And we're at the very conceptual framework part of that process. But I would see that around here, not in the wetlands and not in the forest. I mean, there are some things that are sacred, but in appropriate places that we would create some development, whether it's student housing or other ideas that are related to our mission, that would start to bring revenue to the college that would help us deal with this disinvestment that is happening in Oregon around higher education. So that's definitely one piece of our future that we see. I mean, we can sit and wait for something to happen at the state or national level around the funding of higher education. That, to me, is really putting our fate in somebody else's hands. Right. And we might be waiting a long time. So rather than just, sit back and wait, I think the position we've adopted at Lane is we are going to take our future into our own hands, and we're going to figure out what we need to do to be sustainable and to fulfill our mission. So I very much see, more entrepreneurial activities as being part of our future. I see fundraising, private philanthropy being a much bigger part of our future. We have raised $19 million to a $23 million goal in the last 3 years. Absolutely amazing that our community supports us in this way. But we saw that as part of our financial strategy. We put a compelling case together around healthcare and the need for healthcare workers in Lane County, and our community has really stepped up to support us. That kind of thing will need to continue. I see a much more multicultural student body, and hopefully faculty and staff body. When you look 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we're going to have a much larger Latina population. So we need to think about what are the strategies, what are the things that we need to do to best serve those families and students to make sure that they are productive, a productive part of our community and have all the supports necessary. So I definitely see that. And I see Lane, in spite of all the budget challenges, will continue to be really innovative. They'll be on the cutting edge of what's happening and in teaching and learning practice. Our faculty and staff will bring that to us, and just because it's the work that they do very, very well, we'll make sure that innovation is very much a part of what we do and that we continue to maintain our national reputation for being one of the best community colleges in the country.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
If you like what you've seen, send us an email at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put the DiversiTV in the headline, rather the subject line. Tell a friend about the show. Tell us what you liked about this and any other show. And until then, go well, stay well.